Natalie. I'll be the host for this forum today. So today we'll be discussing about how can we achieve democracy in the electoral system in the UK. So on my left here I have Yee Tuck and Wong Jing Hui. On my right I have Leong Vikcy and Amir. So democracy could also be defined as rule by the people. There are two types of democracy that can be discussed, which are direct democracy and representative democracy. Direct democracy can be achieved through referendum, and it directly shows the will of the people. On the other hand, representative democracy refers to the election of officials or lawmakers to represent the view of the electorate in the parliament. So, representative democracy allows legislating and executive decision-making to be decided by a small number of people, so that the electorate can get on with their daily life and leave the planning and governing to the people who are elected. However, there are two main problems that could be identified in the UK electoral system. The main problems are that the system does not necessarily allow everyone to be properly represented, and the voter turnout in the UK can be very low because of the inconvenience of the voting system. The voting duration is also can be seen as very short, and it's not compulsory for everyone to vote. Therefore, it does not represent the voice of people, thus does not show democracy. So there are four principles that can be seen as a guidance for the UK electoral system, which are equality of vote, equal opportunities to political parties, free expression of popular will. However, just by applying these principles to the electoral system does not show that the system will be a perfect system. This is because the electoral system is more complex and cannot easily be compromised. And the formation and evolution of the electoral system is the core of an electoral law. Electoral systems cannot become objective as the other legal problems. It's important to know the evolution of the electoral system in order to improve the democracy in this system. Prior to the Reform Act of 1832 and 1867, the right to vote was limited and based on rights in property 1832. The 1832 Act increased the franchise by 50%, only 7% of the total population. 1886, John Stuart Mill represented Parliament petition calling for women to be given the right to vote. 1887, Manchester Women's Suffrage Committee was formed, and is said to be united in the National Committee based in London. 1918, the Representation of People Act 1918 introduced a full franchise of all men in parliamentary elections and conferred on women's right to vote over the age of 30, who are either local government electors or the wives of the local government electors. 1948, Representation of the People Act 1948 introduced a full franchise. There are 650 constituencies now in the UK, and the general elections are now in Section 7, Septino Act 1715, and amended by Parliament Act 1911. So the Parliament Act of 2011, the Prime Minister has latitude over the amount of notice given before elections are held, and it takes place following the death or retirement of a member of Parliament. UK takes in the simple majority system, which is the first past the post, and is a plurality voting system. The candidate who wins the most votes in each constituency is elected. And however, there are general restrictions which does not allow certain people to involve in the elections, which are people who suffer in mental illness, the member of clergy, and also the member of those people who are bankrupts or they are corrupt in practices in the elections. So Vicky, so I'll now pass the time to Vicky to further elaborate on the electoral system.
Well, so according to the Article 3 of the First Protocol of the European Convention of Human Rights, it has illustrated the rights to free elections, stating that the high contracting parties undertake to hold free elections at reasonable intervals by secret ballot. So, under conditions which will ensure the free expression of the opinion of the people in the choice of the legislature. So, however, the court has found a violation of the Article 3 of the first protocol in the convention for certain circumstances, which includes the barring of voting for individuals facing bankruptcy proceedings, individuals with mental illness or cognitive and emotional impairments, and also most importantly, the prisoners. So speaking of the mentally disabled, Article 29 of the Convention of the Rights of the Person with Disabilities guarantees the political equality with all persons with disabilities. Yet disenfranchising this group of people shows a skewing of democratic process and in violation of Article 29. So though the most cited reasons include mental infirmity may cause intellectual as well as other impediments, but not all mental illness have an impact on individuals' ability to understand political issues. Instead, there should be corrective measures such as productions of user-friendly informative literature and voting materials to the mentally disabled for them to voice out their choice, and democracy could be upheld.
Yes, I agree with Vicky just now. So when the pilot scheme had been carried out, a much more challenging question concerned the proportionality of compulsory voters' identification and consequently the needs to determine whether such a requirement will impair the essence and effectiveness of the right to vote. Ultimately, as the European Court of Human Rights has made clear, the free expression of the people must not be thwarted by the imposition of any conditions.
Stop lah.
You continue, And the debate around compulsory IDs has been most intense in places where disenfranchisement has been a widespread problem in the past. Despite having several countries that already require ID, namely Northern Ireland, we must not forget that it took many centuries for the voting franchise in the UK to be expanded beyond a narrow circle of wealthy, middle and upper classmen. It was not until relatively recently that women, the young and the working class were allowed to vote. So we must be alert to anything that could reverse the expansion. And regarding to this pilot scheme that held in the UK, Cat Smith, who is the Shadow Minister for Voters' Engagement, said that the government's handling of this undemocratic voters' ID trial has been totally shambolic. After all the fiasco we saw at last year's local elections, with hundreds of legitimate voters turned away from polling stations, it's a disgrace that the Tories are ploughing on with this proposal. So there are some issues that should be taken into consideration when assessing whether the UK proposal for electoral reform will comply with the requirement of Article 3 of the first protocol to the ECHR, which are the minorities such as the poor, elderly, the women, the BAME, LGBT and many more. The compulsory identification may have a detrimental impact upon women, the young and the elderly, as there's recent statistics compiled by the Department of Transport in 2018 revealed that in England, 90% of males aged 60 to 69 own driving licenses in comparison to just 77% of females aged 60 to 69. There is also a significant difference in the proportion of certain ethnicity being registered to vote. In 2014, approximately 85.9% people identifying as white were registered to vote, in comparison to 83.7% of the Asian community, 76% of black community, 73.5% who identify as mixed, and just 62.9% who identify as others. If the government conceives a new voting process whereby only passports or driving licenses would be deemed as acceptable forms of identifications, there would be a genuine risk of indirect discriminations against the poorer sections in the British, in the sense that it biases against them, which is undemocratic. And also, the LGBT Foundation had also raised their concern that voters' ID reforms could disproportionately affect LGBT, which stand for lesbian, gay, bisexuals, and transgender people, the BAME, which stand for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities, and the homeless. This is partly due to the financial cost of obtaining an ID. For example, a new driving license costs £34 and a new passport costs £75.5. They also said that groups within LGBT communities may be more likely to earn less. One study based on data from the 2012 to 2014 Integrated Household Survey found that gay and bisexual men are less likely to be working full-time compared to the heterosexual men. Also, not having a fixed address is an additional barrier to obtaining an ID. This will disproportionately affect LGBT people, as 24% of homeless young people are LGBT. Also, people without a fixed address would be less likely to have forms of non-photos IDs such as utility bills. A transgender or non-binary person ID may not reflect their gender expression or identity, thus may not be eligible to vote. To sum up, the cost, inconvenience, and time required to obtain ID may be prohibitive for some people. Thus, this would eventually have an impact on the effective enfranchisement, as some people might be deprived of the right to vote.
Well, yep. Okay, so in the UK, the most contentious issue that raises persistent moral and legal questions about this enfranchisement stems from the blanket ban on the prisoners being able to vote. So as mentioned, prisoners in England and Wales are not entitled to vote in either like general elections or local elections by virtue of the Section 3 of the Representation of the People Act 1983, which specifically disenfranchised convicted prisoners. So this was challenged under the Human Rights Act in 1998. In Hers and UK, the European Court of Human Rights found that domestic law and practice was in violation of the Article 3 of the First Protocol to the Convention because of the blanket ban to apply to all convicted prisoners and was thus disproportionate and beyond the state's margin of appreciation. So the court noted that the domestic legislature had never sought to weigh the competing interests or to assess the proportionality of the ban as it affected convicted prisoners. So, vast majority of prisoners come from disadvantaged social and economic backgrounds such as alcoholism, drug use, abuse, crime, or poverty culture, which have been filled by the parents, the care, and the education system. The majority have been filled by the education system, as we all know, and many of them have not been exposed to the moral influences, role models, or even education. We hold them accountable for having a failed society. Not only we fail to hold society accountable for or having failed them, but the ability to influence the government that have consistently failed them is taken away through the disenfranchisement. So government are made less accountable to these individuals since under disenfranchisement, the support does not matter. So, prisoners should own the opportunity to influence the formation of the policy on healthcare system, the education systems, and related issues affecting the world into which almost all of them will someday be released. So, the prisoners, they pay the tax on their savings and gains during the sentence. If they are civically alive when it comes to financial contributions, why are they not treated in the same way when it comes to basic human rights? Putting in mind that the prison population includes people who has only committed menial offences and also people who suffer from a miscarriage of justice. So, to conclude it all, formally and explicitly depriving the right to vote of these people is clearly not a society that classes itself as a democratic society.
As mentioned by Vicky just now, the voting eligibility for prisoners is a complicated issue. Different nations tackle this problem differently. Some jurisdiction allows prisoners to vote, whereas others don't allow to do so. The UK government is mulling over this issue If we see other countries like Canada, it was once the case that prisoners could not vote. Canada took over approaches in allowing the prisoners to vote. In 2002, the Supreme Court of Canada decided in South and Canada said that voting is a fundamental right of every citizen in a democratic country. It was held that prisoners have rights to vote under Section 3 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. These decisions overturned the previous decision in Federal Court of Appeal and decided that Section 51E of the Old Canadian Elections Act, which prohibited prisoners from voting, was unconstitutional. Since that time, only 2 adult citizens in Canada are barred from voting, who are the Chief Electoral Officer and the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer. However, Victoria's All Canadian Alliance and Member of Parliament said that the decision in South and Canada in favour of prisoners cheapens everyone's vote. Another individual who did not agree with the decision was the UK Attorney General Dominic Grieve. He stated that if convicted rapists and murderers are given the vote, it will bring the law into disrepute and many people will see it as making a mockery of justice. Besides, it will also insult the victim of crime. After analysing this issue, we can see that there are lacunae in the UK approach. This approach defects the concept of democracy because not every citizen is allowed to vote. The fundamental principle of democracy is a right to vote. Canada advances democracy by allowing prisoners to vote. This displays strong democracy in the country. Therefore, the UK government should take the approach adopted by the Canada to achieve better democracy in the country and respect democratic practices. Based on the statistic by the Ministry of Justice of the United Kingdom, the members of prisoners in UK has, as per March 2019, is 82,000 until the unfair to prevent the prisoners from voting, because even the prisoners broke the rule, but they are still citizens. So they should have the right to elect the government.
To start off, I'll continue onward with the issues brought up by Chin. The contemporary issue that dates back to years and years of heated debates, fueled by both ethical and moral conundrum regarding the prisoners and their right to vote. Neither a united front nor an equal voice will present itself within a system that prioritizes the voices and wants of only a selected group of people. With Brexit fast approaching, it is important to note that once the UK is no longer shackled by the ECHR and its articles, then no longer will they be violating Article 3, which dictates the right to vote for all individuals. It is not an exaggeration to say that the United Kingdom is in the midst of a crisis. Matched with the struggles that arise from the ongoing Brexit, it raises questions of functionality of the current political system. To be specific, concerns over the electoral system and the current paradigm that seems to infringe on the nation's democracy. The pilot scheme, an experiment mimicking the footsteps of neighboring countries such as Northern Ireland, has shown to be incompatible with the current system. It merely adds on a costly element for the voters and only serves to drive them away from voting in elections. Voters' identification was conjured up to combat fraud, primarily the impersonations of voters during elections. However, the Electoral Reform Society have found that only 8 out of 266 allegations during the local and mayoral elections relates back to voter impersonation. A whole scheme that will force voters to produce an ID seems redundant, especially when the chances of it even happening is quite slim. Elections should be held in a way that it welcomes voters with ease, both majorities and minorities alike. Rid any notion of it and rather focus on increasing availability of polling stations, make it more accessible to those who want their voices to be heard. As it stands, political minorities have no place nor influence within a plurality-based system. Specific outreach to trans and non-binary individuals must be carried out, reassuring them that having an ID does not match up to their gender identity will not mean that they are turned away or challenged. If the government chooses to introduce voter IDs, they have a duty to support people to obtain it. This may include financial support or support with the bureaucratic process. One potential way of overcoming some of these barriers is by issuing free and easy to obtain voter identification cards. The UK's electoral system can be summed up fairly simple. It's archaic, or in layman's term, it's outdated. A system introduced once upon a time when there were merely 2 competing parties, will not serve to be efficient nor sufficient to serve as a voting system where the political scene is flooded with various parties. It is not surprising that the single transferable vote has been processed by experts as a probable replacement for the current electoral system. The single transferable vote is an electoral system that puts the power in the hands of the public. Evidence from Scotland and Ireland suggests voters use it in quite a sophisticated manner. Voters also choose between candidates from the same party or various other parties. This means voters can elect all MPs based on their individual abilities. Now, we're not at all saying that the reformation suggested won't come without their own series of cons, but it is a step towards betterment, a step to ensure equal representation of constituents, and to retain and cultivate a system that not only exercises democracy, but preserves it.
Moving to the next point, the reason why turnout is low in the United Kingdom is because citizens do not want to vote. After the United Kingdom Electoral Reform Society conducted a survey regarding this issue, they stated that the most citizens would choose not to vote because they felt that their votes are useless. Voting is a civic duty should be performed by the citizens in a democratic country. The current population in the United Kingdom is 67 million. The total number of parliamentary electors in December 2018 was 45 million, a decrease of 372,000 from the previous year. Since Australia implemented compulsory voting, the turnout has never dropped lower than 91%. The British scholar Pippa Norris revealed that nations with compulsory voting experience a turnout about 14% higher than countries with still adopting voluntary voting. The average turnout rate of 7 nations which adopting compulsory voting is 86.9, whereas the average turnout rate of 32 nations which adopting non-compulsory voting is 72.2. So it is obvious that the turnout rate in compulsory voting nations are higher than voluntary voting nations. According to the Freedom of Light, the practical reality is that compulsory voting produces a better indication of the opinion of the people than voluntary voting. This can conclude that compulsory is an effective solution to increase turnout in elections. However, forcing people to vote is a highly disputable solution. The UK government should introduce and enforce the compulsory voting system. Increasing turnout help legitimize the government in the UK, but with several changes to make the system more acceptable. Compulsory voting may solve the low turnout, but automatic registration and a better provision of information and citizenship education will help to solve the real underlying problem.
Okay, next. Show me your ID, please. Sorry.
What ID?
You may leave now.
What? Oi!
Why are you here? Sorry, you may leave now.
Next, please.
Can we vote together?
Why are you guys even together, like holding hands?
I cannot leave her.
So, lesbians?
No.
Next, please. Next, please. Yes, sir. Can I have your ID, please? Well, Amir, did you commit any offences in the past 5 years or something?
Yeah, I'm still serving.
Well, then, I'm sorry, we are not allowed to vote.
Why can't I vote? What is this?
As we discussed earlier, it's clear that the election system must improve and reform to show democracy and to ensure that the political sovereignty lies within the people during election.